Very warm welcome to News Analysis here on Press TV with me, Nargis Moballeri. Well, after months of talk, 2 weeks of negotiations, innumerable side meetings, bilateral meetings, endless hours of discussion among negotiators, the pieces of the climate accord should now be clear. Those the words of US President Barack Obama at the UN Climate Summit in Copenhagen. He flew in on the last day of talks, a move criticised by protesters who say he swept in to make demands. Well, the pieces of the accord should be clear, but they're not. Meetings between 194 world leaders went into overdrive to try and come out with something, anything concrete. Countries like the US and China, who amount to almost half of the world's emissions, have been criticised for not taking enough of the responsibility and burden. Meanwhile, industrialised countries say the burdens shouldn't be unfair and that everybody has a role to play. And any aid should, of course, be regulated. Nothing new there, then. It's a debate that's been going on for years, decades even. This programme, we ask, what was new about this conference? Why the deadlock? What's the hold-up? And has anything come out of it? Behind the smiles and promises, has it been a success or failure? To discuss that, we're joined by the founder of EcoTube, Chris Smith, via satellite from London. From the Dallas Morning News, Wayne Slater, joining us from Austin, Texas. And on the phone from the Grantham Research Institute, Dimitri Zengalis, on the phone from Copenhagen. I'd like to thank you all for being with us. And Mr. Smith, let's start with that question. A lot of smiles, handshakes, a lot of promises that they say they'll keep regardless of what happens. Has the summit been a success or a failure?
Well, I think it's been a very good kind of love-in for people to talk about the climate problem without actually much action. You know, Obama comes in on the last day, does a speech that really smacks of American imperialism. He's not really offering that much in terms of cuts, yet he's saying to everyone else, you must do more than we are. If he wants to have a leadership, he has to match the rhetoric with action, and I don't think he's been able to do that. And I think it's unfortunate that all the world leaders have turned up for the last 2 days. I think they should have been there last week, and they could have come back now with a proper, you know, an agreement in place. Yeah, and Mr. Slater, would a week have even been enough? I mean, does the fact that the summit has now gone into overdrive, we're in extended sessions, does that indicate that this is just about getting something out there, getting a deal out there to save face, or at this point could we still see something with real substance? Well, I think only time will tell.
Mr. Slater,
to get something out to. Yeah, I think the expectation here is not that this will be a comprehensive agreement, but this will be an effort to save face. Now, on the other hand, this is the dynamic of these kind of talks, where you reach a period of intensity, or as you say, overdrive, where all sides can meet. But you're already seeing some leaders begin to leave the summit. And after, this isn't just a week of negotiations, this has been in the works for years. And we see very little specifically offered by developed nations like the United States, or coming forth during the talks so far. My guess is that there's a lot of talk here, and as your previous guest said, a love-in about the nature of climate control, very few details.
I mean, we've had this three-page draft text obtained by media, Mr. Zengalis, that's come out, and it's suggesting that the level of agreement reached so far is very weak. You're over there in Copenhagen. Give us a sense of what's happening there. What's the strongest possible outcome we can expect right now? Are we heading for a deadlock? Is there any chance that the talks might collapse altogether?
Well, unfortunately, being registered as an NGO, I haven't been privy to the details because I've not been able to get into the Bella Center today. That's one of the symptoms of the organisation of this year's summit, so I can't profess to be on the front line of the discussions. However, it does seem to be the case, as you say, that the measures as they stand on the table now, probably would get you somewhere close to 550 parts per million, which gives you a 50-50 chance of 3 degrees stabilization. That is a very, very dangerous place to be. Now, were all the key parties to stand by and commit to some of the targets that they've talked about, that means 80% cuts by mid-century amongst the developed world, and strong support and demonstration of green growth to the developing world before they are asked to take on targets. And that is, you know, those are all ambitious targets that have already been at least unilaterally agreed amongst the major parties. If they can get a document together that enshrines that, at least as a comprehensive political agreement, then we can make progress.
Okay, well, you said political agreement there.
That seems doubtful.
Well, you said political agreement there, and Mr. Smith, let's talk about that. It's the big difference between a legal obligation and a legal agreement and this political agreement, or legally binding and politically binding that might come out. Explain to our viewers what the difference is, and why has there been some countries shying away so much from making any legal commitments?
Well, obviously it's something that's very difficult to monitor, and there were some questions about if somebody fails to meet their obligations, how does it actually get punished? If it's just a framework without any, how are we going to punish people who don't follow what they've agreed to? It's very difficult. China didn't want to have itself monitored properly, probably because they know they're not going to reach the targets that they're saying they're going to reach. So it is a challenge, and certainly America, they don't want people poking their noses into what they're really doing. There's just basically, in my view, there's a lot of vested interests. It's this old story of let the wealthy nations keep consuming the planet's resources and don't allow the developing world to have a piece of the pie. And that's the problem. That's what we're really facing. How do we decide to run the world? And what does a legal agreement really mean? How does that hold up?
Well, let's get to that point about how we're going to run the world. Look, there's been different voices coming out, Mr. Slater. There's the clear divide. There was coming into this. It's nothing new that there's a big divide on how to deal with this and many other issues between wealthy industrialized nations and the poorer nations. A lot of criticism towards the United States, a lot of criticism about the capitalist system, a lot of criticisms about the wars that are going on right now. Do those have anything to do with climate change and what's going on in the summit right now?
Well, I think it does. I think some of them do. I mean, you have to look at the situation, and here in the United States, the situation with Barack Obama. He can promise, he can hope, he can offer up some ideas, but when he comes back home here to the United States, he has an opposition party, the Republican Party, whose members today are talking about resisting anything, any caps, any controls, any limits on emissions that would cost jobs. And so the key to these kinds of negotiations, political or legally binding, are how can all sides, the developed industrial nations and the developing nations, how can all sides see something to their advantage in a conclusion? My sense is that that's not only a very difficult task, that is not a task that these negotiators have been successful in achieving. One example would be the United States dealing with China, the two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. The United States is demanding that China offer more monitoring, that they have more disclosure, more transparency. China has resisted that for its own reasons. China demands that the United States and other developed countries do better with new and increased goals and limits. The United States has resisted that because in each case it's not in the interest of the party in the negotiation. Until you reach that point, you will not have not just a political, not have a legal, but you won't even have a political agreement until the developing and developed nations all agree they're getting something out of this.